The bank manager slipped me a note across the counter, folded twice, under the deposit slip, and she did not look at me when she did it. She kept her eyes on her screen and she said, in the flat, pleasant voice they use for everyone, "Here is your receipt, Mr. Coleman. Have a good afternoon." And her hand pushed the folded paper toward me, and her eyes came up for just 1 second. One single second. And in that second, she told me everything, which was that I should not open the note until I was outside, and that whatever was in it, she was taking a risk to give it to me. My name is Harold Coleman. I am 70 years old, and I worked 38 years as a machinist, standing at the same lathe in the same shop, turning steel into parts that had to be right to the 1,000th of an inch, because a part that is off by 1,000th of an inch fails, and when a machine part fails, people can die. 38 years of that teaches a man precision, and it teaches a man patience, and it teaches a man that the truth is a physical thing, a measurable thing, that a dimension is either right or it is wrong, and no amount of wishing changes the number on the caliper. I retired with a pension and a retirement account that I had built one careful paycheck at a time for 38 years, never touching it, never gambling it, letting it grow the slow, honest way that things grow when you leave them alone. And by the time I stopped working, it had become enough. Not a fortune. Enough. Enough to see me through whatever years I had left without being a burden to anyone, which was the only thing I had ever wanted, to not be a burden, to have built enough of my own that I would never have to hold out my hand to my own child. I stood in the parking lot of that bank, in the cold, and I unfolded the note, and I read it, and my legs went strange under me, and I had to put a hand on the roof of my car to stay standing. The note said, in small, careful handwriting, "Mr. Coleman, I should not be doing this, and I could lose my job. Your son has been withdrawing large amounts from your retirement account for 4 months, using the power of attorney you signed. Almost half of it is gone. I do not think you know. Please come see me privately. Do not tell your son I told you. Diane." Half of it, gone. 4 months. I read it again, because a machinist reads the measurement twice before he believes it, and it said the same thing the second time. I want to tell you the whole story of what happened after I read that note, because it is the hardest thing that has ever happened to me. And because if you are old, and you have built something, and you have a child, and you have ever signed a piece of paper because your child told you it would make things easier, then you need to hear how this went, and what I found, and what I did about it. Because I did do something about it, and what I did surprised even me. But to understand the note, you have to understand how my son came to have power over my accounts, and that starts about 2 years earlier. And it starts, as these things so often start, with a kindness. My son is named Michael. He is my only child. His mother, my wife Ruth, died 3 years ago. And I want to tell you about Ruth, not because this story is about her. It is not. She was gone before any of this began, but because you cannot understand what happened without understanding that I went through it alone, without her, and that half of what went wrong because she was not there to read the people I could not read. Ruth was a nurse for 30 years, and she used to say nursing was just reading people. The chart said one thing, and the person said another, and the truth was in the gap between them. She could look at someone and know what they were, while I saw only what they showed me, dimensions, surfaces, the measurable outside of things. And when she died, I lost not just my wife, but my instrument for reading the world, and I did not understand how blind I was without her, until I was standing in a bank parking lot, holding a note from a stranger, learning that my own son had been robbing me for 4 months, and I had not seen it, because the one person who would have seen it in an instant was 3 years in the ground. Michael was a good boy. I have to say that, because it is true, and because a story like this is worthless if the son is a monster from the start. He was warm, a little soft, never quite as driven as I might have wished, but kind, the kind of boy who brought home stray animals and cried at sad films, and I loved him without reservation, and I still do, which is what makes all of this so hard, because the man who robbed me is the same boy I taught to ride a bicycle, and there is no clean place to stand in a story like that. No simple anger, only a grief that keeps changing shape. Michael married a woman named Sabrina 8 years ago, and I am going to try to be fair to Sabrina, because fairness is the only thing that makes a story true. But I will tell you now that Sabrina is the center of everything that went wrong. Sabrina was beautiful and ambitious and restless, and she had, from the beginning, a quality Ruth named the first evening she met her. Ruth said, drying the dishes, "Harold, that girl is always looking at the door. She is never quite in the room she is in." She married Michael to get into a better room, and when she figures out he is just a good, kind man who will love her in this room, she is going to start looking for another door. And I hope to God she does not decide our boy's inheritance is the door, because if she does, she will take him through it and not look back. I told Ruth she was being unkind. Ruth was rarely unkind and almost never wrong, and every word turned out to be a prophecy. Let me tell you about the paper, because the paper is where it all begins, and the way it happened is the way it always happens. It was about a year after Ruth died. I was 70. Alone in the house we had shared for 30 years, and I was not doing well. Grief had made me foggy, slow, uninterested in the paperwork of life. Bills piled up, not because I could not pay them, but because I could not make myself care. And Michael, attentive in that first year, genuinely worried about his grieving father, noticed the piled mail and said, gently one evening, "Dad, why don't you let me help with some of this? We could set up a power of attorney, just a financial one, so I can handle the accounts, and you can focus on taking care of yourself." And it sounded like love. That is the thing I need you to understand. It sounded exactly like love, because in that moment, it probably was love, a son wanting to lift a burden off his grieving father. I do not believe Michael had a plan that night, but kindness is the door through which everything else walks. And the power of attorney I signed to make my grieving easier became, a year later, the instrument he used to empty my retirement into his wife's business. And the distance between those two things is the whole story. And it is a distance that gets crossed one small step at a time, so gradually that no one, least of all the person crossing it, ever sees himself become a thief. I want to slow down on the night I signed, because it is the hinge. It was autumn, the house the particular kind of quiet a house gets when the person who filled it is gone. Michael slid the paper across the kitchen table and said it was just for the bills, just to help, and I did not read it carefully, did not ask the questions I would have asked about any part I was machining, did not measure before I cut. I felt, signing it, a kind of relief, the relief of setting down a weight, and I did not understand that I had just signed a broad, sweeping, durable power of attorney, control over the checking, the savings, the retirement, everything, the exact document that a year later would let him drain me. I signed it in a haze of grief and gratitude, and that failure to read, that one failure, is the failure on which everything else was built. For the first year, nothing went wrong. Michael paid my bills, kept my accounts, showed me printouts, and it was all there, all accounted for, and I stopped even looking at the printouts after a while, because it was always fine, and that, I understand now, was exactly the point. A thief who wants to rob you slowly first spends a year proving he can be trusted, so that you stop watching, and once you stop watching, the robbing begins. Sabrina's business started about a year and a half after Ruth died. Michael mentioned it with a forced enthusiasm I did not understand at the time. A brand, he said, luxury wellness, supplements and skincare, and a lifestyle, sold online. The kind of thing I did not understand, and did not pretend to. He said it was going to be huge, that Sabrina had a real vision, that they were getting in early on something big. And I said the encouraging things a father says, good for her, I hope it goes well, and I did not think about it again, because it never occurred to me that my son's excitement about his wife's business and my retirement account had anything to do with each other. My money was my money, in my accounts. Sabrina's business was Sabrina's business. The two things lived in completely separate parts of my mind, and it never once crossed that gap. The thought that the power of attorney could be the pipe through which my retirement flowed into my daughter-in-law's brand. That is what the note told me, standing in the parking lot. That the two things were not separate at all. That they had been connected for 4 months, by a power of attorney and a son who had crossed, one small step at a time, the distance between a kind offer and a theft. I went to see Diane, the bank manager, privately, 2 days later, the way she asked, at a time when she said my son was unlikely to be watching the account. I sat in her small office with the door closed, and she laid it out, quietly, professionally, with a compassion I could see cost her something, because she was breaking rules, and she knew it. She showed me the withdrawals, 4 months of them, large transfers out of my retirement, authorized by Michael under the power of attorney, going to a business account she could identify only by its name, and I remember the moment she turned the screen and I read it. Lumiere Wellness Collective. My retirement, 38 years of careful paychecks, flowing month after month into Lumiere Wellness Collective, and almost half of it gone, and me sending encouraging words to my son about his wife's exciting new venture, while that venture ate the money I had spent my whole life building. Diane chose her words carefully. She said, "Mr. Coleman, everything your son has done is technically legal. You gave him power of attorney. I cannot stop him, and the bank cannot stop him, because he is acting within the authority you granted. But I have done this job a long time, and I have seen a lot of these situations, and I could not watch this one happen without at least making sure you knew, because most of the time the person whose account is being emptied has no idea, and by the time they find out, it is all gone. You still have half. I wanted you to have the chance to do something while there is still something to save." I asked the question I had to ask. I said, "Does my son think I would approve of this, or does he know I would not?" And Diane was quiet a moment, then said gently, "The withdrawals are structured. They are kept just under the amounts that would trigger automatic notifications to you. Someone who thought you would approve would not structure the withdrawals to avoid notifying you. I am sorry. I know that is a hard thing to hear. Structured to avoid notifying me. I need to stop on that word, structured, because it is the word that changed everything. To keep each withdrawal just below the threshold that would alert me requires planning, requires the specific intention to conceal, and a man who conceals a thing has already judged it to be wrong, because you do not hide what you believe is acceptable. My son had not stumbled into this. He had engineered it carefully for 4 months, so that his father would not find out until it was too late. That engineering was a confession, written in the pattern of the withdrawals, and it broke something in me, sitting in that small office, because it meant Michael had known, the whole time, exactly what he was doing. I drove home, and I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had signed the paper, and I did not cry, though I wanted to, because the machinist in me had already moved past the grief and into the problem. I did not call my son and scream at him. Every part of me wanted to, but I did not, because screaming would accomplish nothing except to warn him, and a man does not warn the thing he is trying to understand. I needed to understand first. I needed to know how deep it went, whether Michael was the author of this or the instrument of it, whether my son was a thief or a weak man being used by a thief, because those are different things and they call for different responses, and I could not know which until I looked. The first thing I did was go to a lawyer Diane recommended, a woman named Patricia Reyes, who specialized in exactly this, elder financial abuse, a name I had never heard applied to myself and could barely stand to hear. Patricia revoked the power of attorney immediately, quietly, and had the bank freeze any further withdrawals. So the bleeding stopped and the half that remained was safe. And then she explained my options. And this is where the story turned, because they were not what I expected. She told me I could sue my son. and I would very likely win, and could recover much of the money and quite possibly send him to jail, because breach of fiduciary duty on this scale can be criminal. Send my son to jail. I sat in her office and turned that over, the possibility, and I understood I had the right to do it, that many people would say I should. And I understood something else, which is that I did not want to. Not because Michael did not deserve consequences, but because I am a father, and a father does not stop being a father because his son has wronged him. And the thought of my boy in a cell, the boy I taught to ride a bicycle, was a thing I could not hold without something in my chest tearing. But I could not do nothing either, because to forgive it and move on would teach Michael that he could rob his own father with no consequence, and a lesson like that does not make a man better, it makes him worse. So I was caught between two things I would not do. I would not send my son to jail, and I would not let him get away with it. And the space between those two refusals is where I had to find a third path, and finding it required me to understand the thing I still did not understand, which was Sabrina, and the business, and what was really going on. Because here is what I had started to suspect, and Patricia's questions sharpened into a theory. A business doing well does not need to quietly drain a retired father-in-law's savings, structured to avoid detection, for 4 straight months. A healthy business raises money openly. A business that has to be secretly fed from a stolen retirement is not healthy. It is failing, or worse, was never real. And if that was true, then the money was not building something. It was disappearing into a hole, and my son was not funding his wife's success. He was funding her denial, and taking me down with it for nothing. I had to know. So I approached Sabrina's business the way I would approach an unfamiliar alloy, carefully, from every angle, learning what it actually was before I decided how to handle it. And what I learned, over several weeks of patient reading, was that Lumiere Wellness Collective was not really a business at all, in the sense I understood businesses. It was a multi-level marketing structure, one in which the product is almost beside the point, and the real money comes from recruiting people below you and buying inventory yourself to maintain your rank, an endless series of fees and packages and events that flow upward to the people at the top and drain the people at the bottom. Sabrina was at the bottom. That was the thing I came to understand. In her own mind, she was a rising entrepreneur, a founder building an empire. In reality, she was a customer, one of tens of thousands, buying inventory she could not sell, paying for trainings that taught her nothing, climbing toward a rank that receded as she approached it, pouring money into a machine designed to take it and give her, in return, the feeling of being an entrepreneur, which is a feeling people will pay almost anything for, and Sabrina was paying with my retirement. I understood why the withdrawals never stopped, only grew. A thing like Lumiere has no bottom. There is always another package, another rank, another event, another reason success is one more investment away, and a person caught in it cannot stop, because stopping means admitting she was a fool, that she poured her family's future into a machine that was eating it, and no one can face that, so they double down, find more money, and when their own runs out they find someone else's. Sabrina had found mine. And Michael. Where was Michael in all of this? That was the question that mattered most, because the answer was whether I had lost my son entirely, or whether there was something left to save. Michael, I came to understand, was not the author of the theft. He was a weak, frightened, cornered man who loved a woman he could not say no to, and who had crossed, one small, terrified step at a time, the distance between helping his father with the bills and robbing his father for his wife, and who hated himself for it, and could not stop, because stopping would have meant confronting Sabrina, and confronting Sabrina would have meant the end of his marriage, and Michael was more afraid of losing his marriage than of robbing his father, and that ranking of fears was the true measure of how far he had fallen. I do not excuse him. A weak man who robs his father is still a man who robbed his father, and weakness is its own kind of guilt. the guilt of the man who knew better and did wrong because doing right was hard. But underneath the weakness, there was still my son. I came to see evidence of it, because the more I studied the withdrawals, the more I saw the fingerprints of a man in torment. I spent hours with the printout Diane gave me, laid out on my kitchen table, reading it the way I read tool marks on a failed part. And the story it told was not the story of a confident thief. The withdrawals were ragged, clusters, and then gaps, amounts that started small and grew. There were stretches of 2 or 3 weeks where nothing was taken, and I would look at those gaps and imagine my son in them, resolving to stop, maybe even telling Sabrina no, and then the pressure returning, her need, her certainty, and the resolve failing. Another withdrawal after the gap. A man without a conscience takes smoothly. My son took raggedly, and the raggedness was hope, because it told me the conscience was still fighting, losing, but fighting, and a conscience that is still fighting can be helped to win. So that became my aim, not revenge, not punishment, the saving of my son, the extraction of Michael from the trap that was destroying him. And I understood this was harder than sending him to jail, and more important, because jail would punish the symptom and ignore the disease. And the disease was Sabrina, and the business, and my son's inability to save himself from either. There was one more thing that shaped my decision, and it mattered most of all. Michael and Sabrina had a daughter, my granddaughter Emma, 6 years old. If I sent Michael to prison, Emma would grow up in the wreckage, without a father in the home. And more than that, the thing that had captured Sabrina, the fleeing from hard truth into comforting delusion, gets passed down, absorbed by children who watch their parents live it. If I did nothing, Emma would grow up inside all of it. But if I could break it, free her parents, teach them to live in reality, then Emma would grow up watching 2 people who faced their worst mistake and grew from it. And that inheritance was worth more than my retirement, worth almost anything, and it steadied my hand. So I invited them to dinner, at my house. I said I had been thinking about how little I saw them since Ruth died, that I was lonely, that I wanted to hear about Sabrina's business, which I had never taken the time to understand. And I heard in Michael's voice a complicated thing, relief and guilt and fear together, because he thought this meant I suspected nothing, that his secret was safe, and he did not know that the account was already frozen, that the father inviting him warmly to dinner had already seen everything and was quietly beginning to move. Sabrina talked about the business the entire dinner. I let her, and it was one of the most instructive things I have ever heard, because a person who talks for 2 hours about their delusion to someone genuinely listening will hand you the whole shape of it without knowing. And what I saw underneath the performance was panic. Sabrina was drowning, and she knew it somewhere underneath, and the performance was the thing she used to keep from knowing it. I asked her, mildly, the machinist's question, how much comes in each month versus how much goes out? And she could not answer it, flinched from it, deflected into vision, into the future, because the actual arithmetic was a catastrophe. And she had built an entire personality out of never looking at it. And Michael sat beside her, and I watched my son watch his wife perform, and his face did complicated things, love and fear and shame, and a terrible weary hopelessness. And I understood he had heard this performance 1,000 times, and no longer believed a word of it, that some part of him knew exactly what Lumiere was, and that he was trapped anyway. Because to say the true thing, Sabrina, it is not working, it is never going to work, would be to take away the only thing holding her together, and Michael did not have it in him to do that, even to save his father, even to save himself. I understood then that I would have to be the one to say the words. Michael could not. Sabrina could not hear them from herself, but I could, the outsider, the old machinist who saw dimensions clearly and did not care about anyone's performance. I could say the true thing everyone in that family was organizing their lives around, not saying, and if I said it right, at the right moment, I could break the spell, not to destroy them, but to free them, the way you sometimes have to break a part to save the machine. But not yet. Sabrina was still fully defended, and a true thing said to a fully defended person just bounces off. I had to wait for the crack, the moment reality broke through on its own, and I knew from everything I had learned that the crack was coming, because a machine like Lumiere always eventually demands more than can be given. So I made myself present. I invited them to dinner regularly, asked about the business, listened, made myself a warm, steady, non-judgmental fixture, and I did it for a reason, so that when the crack came, I would be close enough to catch them, and would have earned enough trust that when I said the true thing, it would come from someone they knew loved them. And while I waited, I prepared, with Patricia, the practical structure of what would come after. Because a machinist does not just diagnose the broken part, he prepares the replacement before he removes the old one, so the machine is never left with a hole. The crack came about 5 weeks later, and it came the way I knew it would. The money had stopped because I had frozen it, and Michael did not know I had frozen it, so when Sabrina came to him needing the next big infusion for the promotion package that was going to change everything, Michael went to the account and could not take it, and could not understand why, and could not ask me why, without revealing that he had been taking from it all along. He was cornered, out of moves, and that is when they came to my house, unannounced, on a Tuesday night, both of them, and I opened the door and saw their faces and knew the moment had arrived. Sabrina had been crying. Michael looked like a man who had not slept in days, and he said, in a voice I had not heard since he was a small boy in trouble, "Dad, I have to tell you something, and you are going to hate me." I brought them inside, sat them at the kitchen table, made coffee to give them a moment to gather themselves, and then I waited, and I let Michael find the words, because he needed to confess rather than be accused. And I had waited 5 weeks precisely so this moment could be his confession and not my indictment. And he told me, all of it, the power of attorney, how it started innocently and became something else. The withdrawals, 4 months, almost half my retirement. Lumiere, how much they had poured in, their savings, their credit, everything, and now mine, all disappearing into a hole that only got deeper. The structuring, the hiding. And he wept, telling that part, because it was the part he was most ashamed of. And he told me the account was frozen, that he did not know why, and that he could not keep lying, and had come to confess and beg my forgiveness. He did not make excuses. That was the thing that told me there was still something to save. He did not blame Sabrina, though he could have. He said, "I did this, I took your money, I lied to you, whatever happens to me, I deserve it." A truly lost man reaches for the excuse. Michael took the full weight onto himself, and that ownership told me the boy I raised was still in there. I let him finish. And then I said the thing I had prepared for 5 weeks. I said, "Michael, I know, I have known for 2 months. The account is frozen because I froze it. A bank manager, a stranger, a good woman, risked her job to slip me a note, because you were structuring the withdrawals to keep me from finding out, and she thought your father deserved to know. So I have known everything, and I have been sitting at this table with you, inviting you to dinner, all while knowing, and I did not confront you, and I want to tell you why, because the why is the most important thing I will ever say to you. I did not confront you because I did not want to catch you. I wanted to save you. Catching you would have been easy. I could have called the police the day I found the note, but I did not want to send my son to prison. I wanted to get my son back, and I watched his face collapse, the full horror of it landing, that his father had known all along, had chosen to hold it and wait rather than destroy him, and that this patient love was harder to bear than anger would have been, because anger he could have defended against, but this left him nowhere to stand except in the full recognition of what he had done to a father who responded by trying to save him. Then I turned to Sabrina, who was watching me with the wide, frozen eyes of a person whose whole world is about to be named. And I said the true thing, gently but completely. I said, "Sabrina, Your business is not a business. It is a machine designed to take money from people like you and give them the feeling of being an entrepreneur in return. It is never going to succeed, not because you are not smart or hardworking, but because it is not built to let you succeed. It is built to consume everything you put into it, and it has consumed your savings, your credit, my son's peace, and half my retirement, and it will consume the rest, and then your marriage, and it will never give you the thing it keeps promising, because that thing does not exist. I have looked at it carefully, the way I look at everything, and I am telling you the truth. No one else in your life will tell you, because everyone else is either inside it with you or afraid to hurt you. I am not afraid to hurt you, because I love you enough to hurt you, which is the only kind of love worth anything when someone is drowning. You are drowning, Sabrina, and I am not going to watch you drown and pull my son down with you. The room was very quiet. Sabrina was crying, silently, the tears running down without sound, and I understood I was watching the defense crack all the way through, watching a person come face to face with the reality she had spent years building a whole self to avoid. It is a terrible thing to watch. I took no pleasure in it, but I did not stop, because a thing half broken is more dangerous than a thing fully broken, and I had to let it land all the way to the bottom before I could offer the way out. And then, when I judged it had landed, I offered the way out, the thing I had spent 5 weeks preparing. I said, here is what I am offering. Once, and it is not a punishment. It is a path. First, the business ends. Tonight, you walk away and let it die and grieve it, because giving up a dream is a grief, even when the dream was killing you. Second, you both come clean, fully to each other, because a marriage cannot be rebuilt on the same silence that nearly destroyed it. Third, the money. I am not asking you to repay what is gone, Michael, because you cannot, and demanding the impossible only creates more lies. Instead, you are going to let me help you rebuild, on my terms, with real oversight, and you are going to learn, both of you, how to live within what is real. And fourth, and this is not negotiable, Sabrina, you are going to see a counselor who specializes in exactly this, because what happened to you is not a moral failing, it is something that happens to intelligent people caught in a machine built by experts to catch them, and I will pay for it, and you will go. And I am offering all of this instead of the police, instead of a courtroom, for one reason, because you are my family, and I lost Ruth, and I am not going to lose the rest of you too. But understand that this is the good version, and it exists because I chose to make it, out of love, and if you refuse it, I will have no choice but to protect myself the other way, the legal way. So this is the choice, the path I am offering, or the path the law offers. Choose. And my son put his head down on the table and wept like a child, and Sabrina, after a long moment, said, in a small voice with none of the performance left, I knew, somewhere I knew it wasn't working, for a long time, and I couldn't stop, because stopping meant I had thrown everything away for nothing, and I couldn't face that. I let Michael take it from you, I knew where the money was coming from, and I let him, because I couldn't stop, and I am so ashamed, and I don't know how to be a person who isn't chasing this thing anymore, because it became who I am, and I don't know who I am without it. And that sentence was the sound of the crack going all the way to the bottom, and it was terrible, and it was also the most hopeful thing I had heard, because you cannot rebuild a person who will not admit they are broken. And Sabrina had just admitted it, fully, and a person who can say, I do not know who I am without this thing, has taken the first real step toward finding out. They took the path, all 4 parts of it, and it was not easy, and not fast. There were moments over the following year when I thought Sabrina would slide back, when the pull of the old delusion was strong, but she stayed with it. She grieved the business, really grieved it, and did the hard work of figuring out who she was underneath the thing she had built her identity on. And slowly, over 2 years, she became someone else. Or rather, became, I think, who she actually was before the machine found her. I want to tell you about the rebuilding, because the confrontation is just a moment, and a life is made of what comes after. I did not demand the lost money back, because it was gone. What I did was restructure everything so it could never happen again, protect the remaining half where no power of attorney could reach it. And then, instead of cutting my son off, I brought him closer, not as a victim but as a student. Because the root problem was that Michael and Sabrina had never learned how money actually works, and I decided the most useful thing I could do with the years I had left was teach them. Every week, for a long time, they came to my kitchen table, the table where the paper had been signed, and I taught them to make a budget and hold to it, to read a financial statement, to find the true number under the story. The machinist's discipline, that a thing is either right or wrong, that wishing does not change the number, that you measure before you cut. And slowly I watched them become people who could face a hard financial truth without fleeing into hope. And it was the most important work I have ever done, because I was not shaping steel, I was shaping the people who would carry my family forward after I was gone. Sabrina changed the most. Once she was fully out of Lumiere, there emerged underneath a genuinely capable woman. And it turned out the very qualities the machine had exploited, her drive, her hunger to build something, were real qualities that had simply been captured and misdirected. Freed, she began to build something real, a small, honest business within her means, growing the slow way real things grow, and it succeeded, modestly, and the quiet pride she took in it was a different thing entirely from the frantic performance of her Lumiere days. And Michael learned, slowly, the hardest thing, which was to say no to the people he loved and survive it, to tolerate another person's disappointment. And I watched a marriage that had nearly been destroyed rebuild into something honest, with two real people in it instead of one performer and one accommodator. It has been 3 years now since I stood in that parking lot and read Diane's note. Michael and Sabrina are still married, and their marriage is better than it ever was, because it is finally honest. Emma is 9 now, growing up in a home with 2 honest parents who face their problems instead of fleeing them, and she will never know how close she came to growing up in the wreckage instead. I never got the money back, the half that Lumiere ate, and I made my peace with that long ago, because I have enough, and I would trade far more than half my retirement for what I got instead, which was my son back, my family whole, my granddaughter safe. Michael said something to me a few months ago I will keep for the rest of my life. He said, "Dad, you could have sent me to prison. You had every right, and a lot of fathers would have, and instead you spent 2 months figuring out how to save me. And then you did. Why?" And I told him the truth, that a father does not stop being a father because his son does wrong. That the whole point of being a father is to love your child through exactly the moments when they least deserve it, because those are the moments that make or break a person. And I had decided, standing in that parking lot, that I was not going to let my son be broken by his worst mistake. I was going to use it to make him. So here is what I want to say to you, if you have listened this far. First, the paper. Never sign a power of attorney in the fog of grief or the rush of gratitude, because that is exactly when they get you. When you are weak and someone offers to lift the weight, because the lifting of the weight and the taking of your life are so often the same gesture, wearing the same loving face. Read what you sign. Measure before you cut. Second, if it happens to you, do not react in the fog or the heat. Understand the whole of it before you decide anything. Find out whether the person who wronged you is a villain or a captured soul, because they are different and call for different responses. And third, the hardest one. When you understand it, do not automatically reach for the punishment, even when it is deserved. Ask what you are actually trying to accomplish. If you want to save something, the path is harder and longer, and looks like mercy, and weakness look alike from the outside, but they are not alike. Weakness lets the wrong stand, because facing it is hard. Mercy faces it completely. names it fully, refuses to let it stand, and then chooses the response that saves rather than the one that destroys. And that is the hardest strength there is, the strength to hold someone fully accountable and fully loved at the same time. My son emptied my retirement account for his wife's failing business and structured the theft so I would not find out. And a stranger at a bank risked her job to slip me a note across the counter. And because of that note, I did not lose my money and then my family. I lost half my money and saved my family. And if you had offered me that trade at the start, half my retirement for my son made whole and my granddaughter's future secured, I would have signed for it without reading the paper, which is a joke Ruth would have appreciated, because signing without reading the paper is how the whole thing started, and it is also, in the end, the one signature I would not take back. Ruth read people. I read dimensions, and in the worst moment of my life, without her, I had to learn to read people too, and I did it, barely, in time, and I think she would be proud of me, and I think she would say, in that dry way of hers, that it only took me 70 years and half my retirement to finally learn to look under the surface, but I got there, and I saved our boy. She read people. I read dimensions. But in the end, forced by the worst moment of my life, I learned to do both, and it saved my family. And I like to think that somewhere Ruth watched me finally learn the thing she tried for 44 years to teach me, and that she was not surprised it took a catastrophe, because she always said I was the most stubborn man she ever met, and that I would learn anything eventually, as long as the lesson cost me enough. She usually was right about these things. She usually was.